Well, it's 7:35 and I think we might as well get started. Thank you to everyone for coming. My name is Sarah Bilodeau, and I'm excited to see so many people here joining us. Thank you so much for our guests and all of our community members that have arrived. And I am going to let Kim take over at this point. Kim Haley Jackson, who works with Community Organized for Solidarity, and in addition to that, does so many other things in Belmont that we're so grateful for, including being the vice chair of the Belmont Human Rights Commission and a leader of Black and Brown in Belmont. So Kim, the floor is yours. Thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Belmont family, for joining us this evening. It's really nice to see some familiar names and faces in the audience, as well as some new ones, so welcome. We've become increasingly alarmed at the number of hate-filled and racist incidents that have occurred within our school community over the past couple of months. And thought it would be a good idea. There have been a lot of questions around what are the policies and procedures that the administration has? How do we handle these things? And honestly, to take a look at what's going on in our community. I would like to make a point to say before we start that this by no means is not new. You know, these things have kind of been going on for a while. I think people are becoming more comfortable with coming forward and talking about them. There's a lot more support within the community. And I will say, in terms of working with the administration, with the BHRC, the Human Rights Commission, and the Diversity Task Force, as well as just a parent, they've been very open to working with us and spending a lot of time with us as well. That is greatly appreciated. So however, I'm sure we all have a lot of questions. I kind of want to lay the groundwork for the way the evening is going to work. Let's put out a couple of norms here that we all would like to be respectful of each other's opinions and time. There will be, you will have a chance to ask a question. So we'd like our esteemed panel members to introduce themselves first. We'll kind of talk about what's been going on in the community, and then we will open it up for questions. I would ask that you use the chat to put your questions in, and you don't have to turn your camera on when you're speaking, but we want to be sure that you do have a name up. So if you just have a number, you want to put anonymous, that's fine. Other than that, I think we can get it started. So on our panel today, we have our Superintendent, John Phelan. Thank you for coming, John. Assistant Superintendent, Janice Darias. Thank you, Janice. Say hello. Chief MacIsaac. Hello, Chief MacIsaac. I spent a lot of time talking to Chief MacIsaac, and I'm like always talking to him. So I didn't think I'd get to a point in my life where I'd be talking to the Chief of Police all the time. Or the District Attorney, Marian Ryan. Belmont resident, Marian, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us this evening. So we brought this group of people together to kind of talk about a few things, at least from the school administration perspective, for John and Janice to share details with the school community on the incidents that have occurred recently, what's been going on, what they are doing to address that, what we can do as a community going forward, to bring awareness and hopefully change some of the things that we're seeing within our community. And then Jamie, from the perspective on how the police department is involved in these incidents, when is it a threat? When is it something that should just be handled by the school? When is it appropriate to bring in the police department? I think there have been a lot of questions around that over the past couple of weeks, so I think it's good to get Jamie's perspective. And then for Marian Ryan, weighing in on what are the consequences of some of these actions legally outside of school in regards to hate incidents, and how are we limited in our response to these sorts of issues? So if we're ready, I'd like to open it up to our panelists. So we can start with John and Janice, if you will, to give the community sort of an update on what's been going on.
Sure, I'd like to start, and then I can ask Janice to fill in as well. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Phelan. I'm the proud superintendent of the Belmont schools. I'm glad to be here tonight, and thank you to Kimberly for inviting us, as well as we have two of our school committee members, Mike and Jamal, are on this call as well, so we appreciate our school committee support tonight. The issue of race and incidents around race are not new this year. We have been working through these kind of issues around threats, around hate speech, around graffiti for a period of time. However, it does feel like there are more issues that we're working with right now. We have had threats to students in person. We've had graffiti. We have had online postings, all of which could be seen as in some ways threatening, in some ways hate speech. And as always, towards a population of people, a targeted population of people that causes great fear or harm and wide discomfort in our community. We really want to make sure that we remember that in the schools arena that we are working with children. We are trying to do and perform age-appropriate learning opportunities, restorative justice, and at times consequences for all of these actions, where we're looking to educate and grow good people in the Belmont Public Schools who are, working towards finding out who they are and how they can operate in this world in a way that's inclusive of others, understanding of others. And as a Belmont Public School Department, we have worked for the last 3 years on this type of work through our professional development within the schools. So to the many folks on the call that we work with on a regular basis, thank you. And to our educators who have put time in over the last 3 years on this subject, we obviously need to spend more time on it. We obviously need to work with children and our educators to support children as we work through these incidents that have taken place recently and the history of events that we've dealt with over time in the Belmont Public Schools moving forward. And I would only add one other comment before I let Janice go through some of the situations that we've dealt with recently, is both Janice and I were on a call with the Superintendent's Association across the state today. And the theme of that workshop was anti-racist equity and diversity work within all superintendents in all school districts. And there was some really powerful superintendent discussions, speeches, and stories and protocols and programs that we learned about today. And I would say, given the content of what we heard and talked about today in that call with all superintendents, is that every district is struggling with how to approach anti-racist teaching, support for all families and students to feel welcome, actively responding to and working with families on all sides of these conversations around race equity and anti-racist work. So we did learn a little bit today. We hope to do some more in July when we get together with that group again. But Janice and I have been working with our principals and our educators on some incidents that happened most recently. We have had issues of threatening online postings as recently as today. We sent a letter out to our high school community with the detail of what that post was. We had a posting a few weeks ago where we sent out 2 communications about the content of that post as well. We've had what some might consider assault on a student within the building, an Asian American student who was spit on that we sent out a communication about, and other activity within classrooms with students that we've been working with kids all year since they've been back full time, which does seem to be a long list of in a very short period of time of serious issues that give us pause and cause us to want to continue the work that we've been doing with our staff and with our families. In each one of those cases, we do, if they are threatening in nature and involve the police, we contact Jamie. We have an SRO in our buildings who is fantastic in working with children and families, very skilled. There are times that we have to contact outside agencies to support children and families. And we've made the practice this year of contacting members of our local community partners. We're calling them the community cabinet, to make them aware of what's going on, so we can get their support and get their feedback on how to move forward and ensure that we're communicating properly, ensure that we're making good steps to make all of the families in our community feel comfortable and safe, and where do we need to reach out and do better. So we have had some situations this year for sure. And I didn't know if Janice had anything else to add about the work.
I would just add a few things. In the case of the graffiti that was done on the Wellington School, we did not, we were not able to identify who wrote the graffiti. There was an adult who saw someone, but from the information that we had, we weren't able to identify who that person was. Similarly, we were not able to identify the student who spit on the Asian American student at the middle school. So in those two cases, we didn't have, there wasn't a consequence because the person wasn't identified. And we would certainly encourage anyone in the community, if they have information to share, to please reach out to us, because we need to partner with the community on when these things happen. And we're grateful to the parent who did speak up when she saw the graffiti being done, but wasn't able to get the identity of the person. The middle school worked very hard with the student and her family who had the horrible experience of being spit on in the hallway at the school, but we're not able to identify who that student was. And again, if there are folks in the community who have information, that would be helpful. On the other two instances, as Superintendent Phelan said, the two online postings, we are working with the students who did make those postings, and restorative justice is an important part of how we work with children when they make mistakes, in addition to, and I'm sure Chief MacIsaac will speak about the work that they do when we have, when we receive information about online postings that were threatening, as both of these were. And then also work with the entire community. The posting at the high school happened just today. I'm sure that Principal Taylor will be doing something with the student body at large. At the middle school, there were several times over the last few weeks, starting with information at announcements time or during homeroom time from the principal to all students. Then there were all school assemblies talking about behaviors and some that are absolutely not acceptable in our school. And then in a community block, which is like an advisory in small groups of students yesterday, educators worked with students. So it's both setting the expectations for the culture of the school, as well as working with the individual students who are involved in these acts of hate against specific groups of students, or and making sure that all students hear the message that we stand with them, and we want every student to feel welcome and belonging, and that they are valued and loved for the whole identity that they bring to school, and that we won't stand for acts of hate against any individual or group of students.
So, and Janice, I'd only add, and thank you, that we know we have issues that we, when we find out, we respond to, and where needed, contact Jamie and the police department and other agencies. And we also know that there are situations, issues, or online postings that we're not aware of, that we have to assume are out there, that students are responding to or interacting with. And when brought to our attention, we sit down and we respond accordingly. And we also get information from children of things that happened outside of the school day, 5 o'clock on the playground, walking home, interactions down on Leonard Street that get brought to our attention that may have happened on a Saturday or a Sunday. We're very fortunate to have someone like Chief MacIsaac to be able to call at any time, get his feedback, get his guidance, involve him where appropriate, and we follow his lead when we're now working under this restorative justice mindset, it really is a result of wanting to make sure that our children are learning, held accountable, but also, where we talk about what punishment and consequences are, keeping in mind the age group of students that we're working with in the situation that is in front of us. And usually each situation is a little different, but also has a lot of similarities. So we appreciate Jamie's work in bringing things to our attention when we need to know, and we bring things that we find out to his attention. And the partnership is very appreciated by the Belmont Public Schools.
Okay, thank you, John. And with that, Jamie.
Thank you, Kim. Jamie MacIsaac, Police Chief here in Belmont. And, I guess I'll start by saying how we deal with threats. As Superintendent Phelan said, it's something that we deal with probably at least 3 or 4 times a year, sometimes maybe more. And is sometimes the incident is brought to us from the school. Sometimes it's outside the school. I can give you an example of that happened 2 years ago. There's a group that monitors Twitter and those things, those kinds of things. And they contacted us and said, hey, and they had a posting of a kid wearing, was identified as Belmont High student. And he made some comment about that he was going to come shoot the school up. So we were able to discreetly contact the student, and then we do what's called a threat assessment. Our SRO will talk to the NEMLEC STARS team, the threat assessment team, and they compile a lot of data, and I can talk about how that's become useful as well. We look at other posts that the student might have made, maybe talk to a couple of friends, but then we also find out, because we have the database here, to find out if there's legal guns in the house. And then we'll contact the parent and say, do you know if your son or daughter has access to firearms? And we basically make an assessment, and we'll tell the school that we don't think, that, in our opinion, to the best of our knowledge, that this person is making a threat. But then you have the school discipline end of it, that the school then takes over, and we step out. We've never charged, to the best of my knowledge or recollection, a student with making threats in the school. We've always been able to handle it through the school, through discipline. And so that's how these latest cases have come to us. They both come from the school. We do an assessment, we talk to the parents, and in some cases we might call the district attorney's office, ask them what they think about it. And then we hand it back over to the school. Well, not hand it back over to the school, but the school does the discipline part of it. In the incidents of things being written on the walls at the school, so I think the one at the Wellington came in towards the end of the day. We send the officer who's on patrol in that area up to the school. They take pictures, they talk to the principal or whoever might have saw it, they take an initial report. The next day, the school resource officer, Melissa O'Connor, began her investigation. She talked to the witness and tried to view some video to see if there was anything that they could identify students from the video. And, and then basically we keep a record of it. If anything comes forward, if anybody hears anything, then we would move forward. I think, in those cases, you got to remember that you're dealing with kids. We don't, like the incident with the spitting at the middle school. I got a lot of questions of like why we weren't more actively involved. And as Janice said, without witnesses or anything like that, I mean, the only option I could think of that the police could do anymore would be to go to the school and say, let us know who wasn't in class at that time and we'll interview them. But nobody wants that, right? These are young kids. So we did not do a report on that. We left that for the school. If we were able to, or if the school was able to identify a student, we probably, and we found out that it was intentional or whatever, we probably would have done a report on that. But so I think our response dealing with children has to be measured. The SROs work with, they inform me anytime there's any of these incidents. I know about them. I'll talk to John and, we'll discuss what the options are going forward. But we're always conscious of, law enforcement and coming in and dealing with, these kinds of incidents. And we want it to be a measured response. So we basically work in partnership with the school and we help them in any way that they need the help to solve these incidents.
Thank you, Jamie. So what I would like to do before we go on to Ms. Ryan, if you have questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand. And at the conclusion of Marian Ryan's discussion, then we'll start the open question portion of our program. So Ms.
Thanks,
Ryan.
Kim.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Marian Ryan, the district attorney. Thank you for including me in this. I can speak first a little bit to sort of the broader view of what's happening. In Middlesex County, we have 54 communities. We have every day just a quarter of 250,000 children going to school, in kindergarten to high school. And Belmont certainly is not alone in seeing an uptick in these incidents. We're seeing that across the county. But what is different, I think, from many places that we see is the level of partnership you have here in the community. And also the focus on the kinds of responses that our office is looking to. And as the chief mentioned, it's a balance. We certainly don't want these incidents going on. We also are looking to not get to a place where we're giving young children and young adults a criminal record. So when somebody is identified, that's the first piece, right? When any violation occurs, the first piece is, can we figure out who did this? If we can, then the question is, what are we going to do about that? And you've heard a lot of talk about restorative justice. I am a very deep believer in restorative justice, worked very hard with Senator Eldridge on the bill to have that offered across Massachusetts. And that really is because restorative justice does what so many other parts of the criminal justice system don't do. It helps to change hearts and minds. And that's the best way to change behavior. Because, right, as the superintendent mentioned, we want to raise good people. And what we want people to do is have some accountability for what happened, and also have them really understand how they need to be behaving differently and what the impact was on other people of what they did. And restorative justice works really well with that. And I saw somebody put in the chat, what does restorative justice look like in these kind of situations where you might have a threat? And it's very much the same as how we use it in lots of places. It is always up to the person who, if there's a particular person who's been victimized, it is always up to them whether he or she wants to participate in the restorative justice circle. And in that circle, the person who is alleged to have committed the offense has to first listen to a recounting of what it is that happened, what the impact has been, and various people can speak to, whether it's the person who actually was affected, whether it's members of the school community, members of the bigger community, how it affected them and what it caused them to do or not do, whatever it was. And then the person who's alleged to have committed that offense has to speak to what they were thinking. How did that happen? And then the circle makes a decision about how best that person can be held accountable and also make some reparation for the harm they've done. The whole idea of restorative justice, and it is the way that when we actually proceed with a criminal case, we charge people. The criminal case is always the Commonwealth versus Marian Ryan. It isn't the individual person. And that is because there are things, and it's particularly true around hate and bias incidents, where you have harmed society. You've broken the contract we all agree to. And there's a question in the restorative justice circle always of what should you do to help repair that damage to our fabric of society. And then the circle makes a decision about what's an appropriate response. And the individual who's alleged to have committed that offense makes a decision about whether or not they're going to accept that punishment. For us in the criminal justice system, if somebody's not willing to do that or says, I actually didn't really do it, or I don't want to take that punishment, then the case proceeds through the trial process. What is sort of interesting about it is it actually comes from a tribal tradition. It's not a traditional American notion. It certainly doesn't fit with what we think of about the criminal justice system, which is often very punitive. We are really borrowing from tribal wisdom. So that's sort of what we are looking at. We also have a very large menu of other kinds of diversion programs for people. Their juvenile system, that as we apply it, is structured. So there are lots of opportunities if somebody's willing to take some responsibility for what happened, and we can have something happen that changes where they're going. That's where we want to be. I think what we really recognize is that moment which creates a criminal record for someone is when they're arraigned in court. And that's a really significant moment, because once you get arraigned, you are now a criminal defendant. You are not the person you were a half an hour ago. So there are times when that's the only possibility, but especially with young people, we try to avoid getting to that place. The other thing that's very important that we've done is to create an anti-bias, anti-hate task force to service the entire county. Because one of the things that I think affects the community a great deal is when, and that's why these programs are so important. Very often we would go out on something that happened that was clearly going to be charged as a crime, and we would find out from people there'd been 10 other incidents that no one really knew about. These things are very insidious. They eat at the fabric of society. And when people don't have a place to go with them, because some of this behavior is not criminal, not criminal in the sense of being charged. In some cases, you can't identify who did it, but something wrong still happened. So we created an opportunity for people to report any of those incidents to our office. There's a form that's on our website, middlesexda.org. You can fill the form out right on the website. You can include whatever information you want to put in there. You can attach, if you have photographs or anything that you want to attach, you can do that. We have a director of our racial justice initiatives who collects those, who goes through those, reaches out to people to talk about it. We try to figure out, are there patterns of things that we need to be addressing? Are there communities that seem to have particular issues around something? Can we do an education piece? I mean, it sounds like, frankly, from some of these school incidents that we're hearing, some community education might be an important part of how we go forward with this. We see these incidents even in very, very little children. We have a lot of incidents across the county that are happening in the elementary schools. And that's a place where we really can intervene. And by getting community education out there, really make a big difference in doing that. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to take people's questions, to talk about sort of what the options are, what the standards are. And then I do think that when we have behavior that rises to the level of a criminal offense, it is important that we name what it is. That if something is done, if it's a punch or a fight or graffiti, and it's actually somehow based in hate or bias, we need to call that out and to make a determination about that. You may have seen a lot of discussion. There is a bill pending. Our hate crime statute in Massachusetts is a little bit clunky, for want of a better word. It's hard to get things to fit into that. There's a bill pending right now to make that a more streamlined process. Our office has also filed a bill to take out the requirement in the hate crime statute right now that injury to property, usually through graffiti, can only be charged as a hate crime if you own the property. So if you live across the street from the Wellington and somebody writes something incredibly offensive to you on the side of the Wellington and it faces your house, we could, if we identified that person, we might be able to charge that person with the graffiti, but we couldn't charge them with the hate crime because you don't own that. So that's a piece that really needs to get fixed. And this bill that I filed would also require that if somebody is identified, prosecuted, and pays restitution, the money that they pay has to be used by the owner of the property to remove the damaging graffiti. So that's kind of an overview of where we are, and I'm happy to take questions and talk a little bit more about all of these incidents or the law in general. So thank you.
Muted. Yep. Thank you so much, DA Ryan. What I'm going to do, I will start in the chat and give everyone a chance, given the time, hopefully give everyone a chance to ask their question. And I will start with Grace. You were first.
My question was around this idea of not charging young people, which I appreciate, but if a victim or a victim's family felt strongly about pursuing charges, would that be taken into account, assuming that someone could be identified as a perpetrator?
Yes, we are always talking to a victim or a victim's family, assuming we have both an identified person and sufficient evidence to go forward. Then we would always be talking to the people affected, explaining what the options are, and trying to come to some equitable resolution.
Okay, thank you. Does that take care of your question, Grace? Perfect. I'll move on to Laura Caputo. Welcome, Laura.
I think I've had my question answered.
Okay, you're good. Okay, thank you, Laura. Moving on to Jess Hicks. Welcome, Jess.
Hi, can you hear me? No.
Yes. We can hear you.
Oh, you can. Okay. My question is, when there's a statement like, or a with the high school, and there's not a clear singular victim, how does restorative justice work? Will there be a circle? We already have many in the LGBTQ community who are going to be concerned about what happened today, or what came through to us today. So I was just wondering, how does this kind of situation, how does that get treated when there's not a victim involved, a singular victim involved in those circles?
I'll answer that. Thank you, Jess. Principal Taylor is in his second year at Belmont High, and he brought the restorative justice work with him from his previous school and began the professional development for staff last year prior to COVID. And then obviously we were all interrupted and we're back in school now. He has already started and been working with students around circles this year. For the last 3 or 4 weeks, there have been several that have taken place. I know that when today's issue arose and he worked through getting the facts, he has reached out to the student population of the Gay Straight Alliance within his school. And I'm assuming he may work with that group while he works through this issue in this offense that happened today. I don't know for sure how he'll incorporate student voice in that within that circle. When you don't have one person or a small group of people identified as the victim, it'll make it a challenge. So I'm assuming he may use a representative group of some of the students that are active in that work at Belmont High.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. I would like to welcome our co-moderator, Shayna. Hi, Shayna. Shayna will be taking over the questions from now, or for now, rather.
Great. So I guess next up is Renee. Renee, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, good evening. My question would be, if you have a student that has been the target of a negative incident for more than a year and not enough has been done to intervene or to stop, it comes down to the point where that student responds, why does restorative justice make that person feel that they are guilty or to blame?
Thank you for the question. I understand in working with students and children, middle school, high school age in particular, that there are times where a student has suffered a period of time of insult or backlash that he or she then may act out on after a period of time. And I guess it's not all about blame, as it's about what's happening and how we can support that student and why did they do what they put the action that they took. And understanding why and the intent behind their action is actually important. Because if in fact that student acted out because there was a long duration of incidents that involved that person as the victim, there would be a very clear understanding why he or she had good intent or what their thinking was. But in the end, we all have to figure out how we can respond in different ways and how we can support that person before it gets to that point. So I don't have a perfect answer for you. I think restorative justice is dialogue, it's learning, it's being accountable to, and I think each case we're working through, especially over the last year and a half, we're trying to bring through that model that we're learning how to use more effectively, every time we use it.
And I would just add, Renee, that your question brings to light the complications of this work. It's not as simple as one person does something wrong and someone else suffers for it. There's usually more to the story, and the part that is so important for the folks who work directly with the children, the educators, the guidance counselors, the social workers, the assistant principals, the principal, to know the children well enough to have and to create a space where they can share what's really going on, because it is rarely just a simple act. There's always more that goes on, and I think every response has to be tailored to the situation, and always with the goal of understanding and helping arrive at a better place for all of the children involved. So thank you for asking that question. I think it's important that it's rarely a clear-cut situation.
Great, thank you. Jessie Bennett.
Hi, I'm just getting back online here. Getting unmuted and all that. I wanted to thank everybody for being here tonight and holding this forum. This is really important. I think that, a lot of parents want to feel safe in the district. And the students certainly want to feel safe. I'm concerned about the climate at Belmont High and also at Chenery, just because I know of students who've been bullied for their sexual orientation or their perceived gender identity. And I wanted to hear more, because I've come into contact with students who aren't being supported at home, as kind of like knowing that I'm a safe adult, how does the district help support those students, or all LGBTQ plus students at school, in terms of, addressing these incidents, but also the ones who are not being supported at home are especially vulnerable to incidents of abuse because they might not feel empowered to speak up. So there are all kinds of things in the system that we would want to do to support kids, especially like trans and non-binary kids, in terms of using their pronouns properly at school, even if they don't want their parents to know that was happening. So I just wanted to hear, what ways we're helping those students feel safe in school and supported and accepted.
Thank you, Jessie. About 4 years ago, we set up an affinity group for our the Gay Alliances at the high school, but the term at the middle school is different. And we have peer groups. We have an adult paid stipend for teachers to work with those students. They attend that club without having to ask a parent. They can go to the club as someone who just wants to be involved and interested and supported. Our guidance counselors work with those kind of challenges every day, whether it's around issues that folks are having a hard time talking with their parents about, or issues in school, or both. The schools really can only work with issues that they're aware of. This one issue that you bring to our attention is really challenging for children, because home might be the place where they don't want folks to know, especially in the middle school. And having that conversation is very challenging. I think it's a case-by-case situation. We do have support on bar right now with a contact that we can use to get, some expertise or some support. If you notice, we just advertised a few events for that group that we're really happy to do. In the end, we're trying to support the child and what they think is best for them. And we do have a social worker at the middle school. We have a psychologist at the middle school. We have guidance counselors at the middle school. And if we need to seek other kind of professional support, we will. So it is a delicate balance for that one issue. That is the one issue that we struggle with folks, young people identifying themselves at school in one way, maybe at home in another. So I don't have an exact recipe for how we handle those, other than we do it with care and respect. And I think what the children really feel is the respect. They have to be respected. They have to feel valued. And that's why sometimes we have to work with them before we bring that to the attention of parents. And when we do, it's done in a respectful way.
Are there ways, though, to indicate to staff, for instance, that a student wants to be referred to by certain pronouns, that might be different than what their gender markers are in their records? Or is that on a case-by-case basis that the student is expected to do that work? Because that can be really exhausting for a student to have to go to all their different teachers and say, no, these are my pronouns, please use them.
We do not have a policy in place right now for that. And I think relative to a practice, if that student is working with a guidance counselor, that would be the mechanism to make that word known, get the word out to all the teachers on that child's schedule so they would be aware of that. Similar to how we would work with a child that might have other types of medical needs or an IEP where that team meets during the day and that information can be shared. So I would encourage the families and the child to talk to their guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor can do that work with their scheduled teachers that they see every day. And it's a great question that we might need to get better at. Quite frankly, there might need to be a more explicit way that can happen so students don't have to work that hard.
There are resources I can kind of pass on to the administration for how best to support students in those situations. Thanks.
We would gladly accept them. Thank you.
Thank you. So just a reminder, I know that some people are raising their hands. Can you put your question in the chat? And I will call on you when we get through the list. So the next question is coming from Catherine.
Thank you. I would also recommend using school nurses. They can be valuable supports for students. My question was about student leadership, and certainly the culture of the school sometimes comes from student leadership. So there used to be peer mediators when we had incidents years ago who were phenomenal in handling some of these incidents. So I just wondered if you could speak to that.
Sure. It was actually the topic today, Catherine, of the MASS talk, really trying to activate and utilize and give voice to students in this work. When I was the principal, we did have conflict resolution that did include student-trained, a student-trained body of peers that we could use for that work. And it did work out well for a long time. And I know in Belmont, just in previous years, we had a group and a club at the high school, Black in Belmont, where those students were able to go to the adults, but the students were the one in charge of the club. The students were the ones that made the decisions, and they were the ones that came up with a plan to walk out one day to establish their voice to the community of Belmont. So that work is still there. And I know the circles that Principal Taylor does, they are student generated and student attended, and would actually like to bring more adults into those circles so they can hear what the kids are saying. So we're starting to make sure that we can connect student voice to adult ears in this work as well. So Janice and I attended a really great activity today with student voice, and hopefully we'll learn more over the summer.
And I would just add to that, it is something that we've talked to, and I know Lisa Gibalerio's in the audience, the Belmont Wellness Coalition, and it's something that she's talked with me about and talked with Isaac about. As with many things, those conversations got interrupted by this last year and a half of pandemic. But I think, you know, there's an opportunity. We have amazing students in our schools, and I think there's an opportunity for that kind of programming to be in place. You know, I think and speaking to that, and also to Jesse's question, and really at the heart of all of this is it's critically important that all students have at least one adult in the school that they can go to, whether that's the school nurse or their guidance counselor or a teacher that they feel very comfortable with. And that's you know, ideally more than one adult, but at the very least, every child has one adult that they feel comfortable talking to. And that's something that we always strive for. And this year it's been tremendously hard without having every child in person all the time. It's a goal that we strive for. And that's how we can find out that, for example, there's a child whose parents don't know that they identify as a different gender than their pronoun, than their markers, or whatever situation is going on, or a child that feels like they're being bullied and no one's listening. That's the idea behind the small group advisory in the middle school, where instead of being one child out of 130 on a team, you're one out of 7 or 8 in a group with one teacher that you meet with regularly, in a setting where it's not an academic class. It's a chance to build relationships and spend time together and have that kind of an opportunity to talk about things. So that's work that we are doing and will continue to do. But I think it's really foundational to kids to all children having, feeling that sense of belonging and being cared for.
Great, thank you. So just another reminder here, if you have a question that you don't feel comfortable asking, and you can also either direct message me on the chat or post anonymously. So next is Stephanie Buckner.
Nope, double mute. Sorry, double muted. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us tonight and for working through all of these difficult issues. I'm interested in sort of understanding the protocols a little bit more of what goes into decision making on, you know, when something goes out to the public versus when something stays within the school. And particularly in the areas where it's like graffiti, I think, or I guess postings on websites where it's really apparent to children that these things are happening, and how we are addressing it with our student population and helping to align the messaging at home and the messaging in school. It feels like the kids know these things are happening, right? And it sounds like in some levels at the middle school and high school, there may be assemblies going on about it, but I'm not sure that's happening at the elementary school, and I could be totally wrong, but I would love and happy to partake as part of, you know, the Butler has a DEI committee where we've talked about this, like, what are the talking points parents could get? What are the ways that parents and teachers could align, because we're, you know, the kids know that these things are happening, even if we erase it really quickly. And there's obviously opportunity for learning and growth there.
So I think what we started to do a few years ago was really get involved in the see something, say something. And that's not just in school, like when you see something or hear a conversation that in that work started with violence or threats or students posting things. We developed a hotline at the high school that was anonymous, that if students heard something or saw something online, that they could provide that information to the school anonymously, and we would work with our resource officer to combat that. We have not brought these student-based programming down to the elementary school yet, but I think Janice could speak to, I think we had at least 2 years worth of parent forums. We actually partnered with BASIC, the after school program. We partnered with other groups. SPAR has paid for some of these speakers. So we were on a run where we would have at least 3 speakers a year separated with some time that were offered to all levels of parents. Sometimes we'd do a high school only. Sometimes we'd do a general admission one where we thought it would be helpful to all parents of children of all ages. And back to District Attorney Ryan's comment, and I think in consistency with what you're saying, is there's a lot of work at home that can be done to support this. There's work at school that can be done to support this, and there's a partnership there that we can engage in. And there's also community groups that can help us get these words out, get speakers in. And speakers aren't the only tool in the toolbox. They're one tool combined with what's happening at home, combined with some tools that we can give parents to use, and what we can do with educators. So we have tried the work of speakers. We do have training. We did SEL work several years ago, and we have current programming at the elementary school right now. Open Circle is one example of that. So at the elementary age level, it's a little different than middle and high. We think the speaker series are great. And I really encourage the adults in every child's life to be involved in what they're on social media. And I encourage parents to see something and say something. If they see something on their child's phone or what they've been online looking at. And that's not just something that they may be struggling with, but it might be something that their friend said or did, or what they've observed. All of this is to keep students safe. All of this is to be able to be consistently supporting kids in making healthy decisions. The access to media right now is quite frankly alarming. And I think we really need to be active participants in what students are doing on their phones and online, because they're getting a lot of information there that's not always healthy.
Stephanie, specific to your question about, for example, the graffiti at Wellington, I believe it was a 4th grader who saw it first, and the principal and staff at the Wellington did go to all the 4th grade classrooms and talk with them, and I believe also the 3rd grade classroom. So in age appropriate. I don't know specifically if she sent something out to families with some talking points, but I know that, for example, Principal Costa also sent out, and today in the letter from Principal Taylor, some resources for parents about social media. But your point is well taken, is, whatever we can do to send home information that provides resources or talking points to families, then to reinforce the kinds of conversations we're having with children in school, then that is very important to do. So that's good feedback.
Yeah, and I think I say this as like also as a partnership, at least for the Butler, and I'm sure we would very much share, and that's something that came up in our committee that we're interested in being helpful with. And even in this conversation, we're mentioning Wellington, but the graffiti that happened at Butler, like 2 weeks later, there wasn't an email out, and the graffiti was of a different, done towards a different group. And even that sort of kind of felt like, well, we're going to do it when it's this racist, but when it's anti-Semitic, we didn't say something. So I've heard that from a few parents feeling like, what, you know, so I think it's really important that there are clear protocols that families know about so that you're not backed into a corner where it might be like, well, it's really because it was on April vacation, right? Versus the fact that it was anti-Semitic versus racist. And I recognize like these are just continued things that you're going through. So it's staying in collaboration, not to put you on a spot in a bad way.
No, we appreciate that. And there is a balance that we need to strike, and there is a consistency that we need to strike. And we appreciate your offering it up in a way to partner. So thank you.
And if I can just comment, because I took some questions over the week as to why we did a press release on the Wellington incident and not on the other incidents. And generally in these situations, we'll do a press release if we feel we can gain something from it. In the incident of the Wellington case, we knew that the graffiti had occurred over the weekend. We knew there were adults in the playground over the weekend. So we were hoping to attract maybe an adult who said, yeah, you know what, I actually saw, you know, we did have an adult who saw what happened, but wasn't really able to provide much. So we were hoping to attract, you know, another adult to come forward and say, yeah, I saw the student who did it, or, you know, whatever. And that's why we did one in that case. As far as, you know, when these incidents happen, you know, we talk with John, and it's not unlike when the Belmont Fire Department, and when we talk to the fire department, we say, who's going to do a press release on this? Well, it's more of a fire incident. You're going to do the press release on it. And that's how we kind of do it. So there was no, the only reason we did one on the Wellington was in hopes that we could attract somebody who may have saw what happened.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that, again, like, is important, like, in the means of transparency, and will help you all, right, in fighting off of, like, how did you pick that one, right, as we're understanding. And I totally get it coming from where I work too. It's hard to know where the policies come from, and sometimes they're totally irrational, but yeah, thank you.
So next we have Jess Hicks.
Hi, sorry. It takes a little bit to push all the buttons to unmute and all of that. So my question was regarding restorative justice circles. There's a bit of a steep learning curve, and I guess I'm concerned that as our administration is getting up to speed and how to best use these practices, there might be harm done unintentionally. And I was wondering if there was ever an opportunity to have them work with mentors in restorative justice, or to have experts come in as we're seeing more and more of these situations arise, just to make sure that it's being handled in the best way possible.
We have not had that yet, and that's a great question, Jess. We do want to make sure that we move forward respectfully and professionally. And I know that Isaac has been talking to Janice about this, so I will let her speak to it too.
Yes, and we actually have just received 2 very generous grants, one from the Foundation for Belmont Education and one from Belmont Against Racism, to support bringing in experts to work with not just the administration, but a group of educators who will then in a sort of train the trainer model. So we'll train a group of educators who will then work with their colleagues so that to build the capacity of all of the folks in the school.
And I will add, just from the police side, we partner with C4RJ, Communities for Restorative Justice, and they would be the ones, you know, organizing the circles. They have trained volunteers. And in the event that we had one of these cases that did rise to the place where, you know, the area where we would charge, C4RJ, if we had a willing victim, would certainly be the avenue that we would go with these cases.
Great. Sarah Jensen.
Hi, I appreciate this discussion. I feel like some of the later questions expand upon my question, so I don't want to take a lot of time. But one thing I was curious about is how we are engaging parents more in the restorative justice process. And then as people are talking about in their other questions, the community at large, I'm thinking about, the kids who are, carrying out these acts that cause harm, they come from a family, where they may have learned some of these ideas, maybe not. And so I would just like to hear more about how parents are involved in the process.
I know we contact our parents and we work with them individually in each case. Fortunately, in Belmont, we have a tremendous amount of support from parents when their child is identified as someone who may have made the post or made the threat or committed the act. And in that discussion, we can well identify in most cases that we have a cooperative, well-meaning family at home. There are times where that may not be the case. And at this point, we do have a limited repertoire to do that work with parents. So it's a great question, and it's one that we'll have to think about. We did have one situation that we, of all these situations that we described today and tonight, there was only one where we have a little worry about the parent at home and how that was handled at home. And we have to reflect on how we can better serve that family or those folks who may not have the partnering with the schools in the way that we would like them to. So that's a challenge that I don't have a complete answer to. But luckily, we live in a community that the majority of our parents are advocating for their child, but also understanding of the situation and are open to the dialogue and the work and they put into the partner with the school. So that part of the community we very much appreciate.
Renee?
Hi, me again. So the question is, we worry about kids who target other kids within the school. But the question is, when it's staff that may target kids based on their color, their sex, their origin, or whatever, how is that dealt with? The second part to that question is, and I'm listening to what Janice said, as far as a child having someone, a go-to person in the school to talk to. I look at the cultural diversity of students that we have in the school versus the staff and the to-go person. It doesn't balance out. So how do you tell someone of a different culture to go and talk to this person who may not understand their culture, where they come from, where they lived, or anything of that nature? How do you tell that child to trust somebody to talk to? How are you dealing with that? How are you trying to make it better for kids within the school who feel like, I can't go to that person because they don't know my culture, they don't know where I come from, they don't know what I'm going through? I mean, how do you provide somebody to them to deal with that? And I know we're talking about a lot of negative things. I just want to put one positive thing out there. This is to, I think, Police Chief MacIsaac. Yeah, I want to say, I believe it's Officer O'Brien that's in the middle school. We've used him as a to-go person. I've been in Belmont for many, many years. And I want to just say to you, he is a wonderful person and has helped, on a personal level, I want to say, through some difficult times. So I just wanted to acknowledge that on a positive note through all this tonight, and wanted you to hear that from me. He's wonderful.
Thank you very much. It's Officer Haran. Michael Haran.
Officer Haran. Okay, I wasn't sure. But yeah, wonderful. I praise him. I can't praise him enough. And I just want you to know that I do appreciate him very much.
Thank you.
So I think I'll answer the first part of your question, Renee, and I think I saw Janice looking to answer the second part of your question. So we would and have conducted investigations on the dynamic of a staff person's interaction with a student. So that is a process that we have done that has taken place in Belmont, and that can happen at the request of a parent, whether that's through the bullying form on the website or through a dialogue with your assistant principal or principal. So and it has happened. It's a real thing, and it's an investigation. It results in a bullying report and a finding, and that information is provided in some detail to you if you were the parent of the child, as an example. So that is a process that someone can initiate in any public school, as well as the Belmont Public Schools. In terms of staffing and building relationships, I know Janice, you look like you wanted to answer that, so I'll let you answer that.
Yeah. So Renee, you are exactly right that we don't have the diversity in our staff that matches the diversity of our students. That is something we're working on. But in the meantime, we also are expecting our staff to learn how to be culturally responsive, culturally proficient, to be able to not make assumptions and to understand that race plays and has a role in everything we say and do. And you have to step out of your normal lens. If you haven't learned about this country's complicated history with race and how it still has impacts in the experience of our students of color in our schools, you have to learn. That's an expectation of being an educator in the Belmont Public Schools. For the last 4 years, it's been, we have required times of professional development, and it's been part of our required professional development for everyone. So while it is true that the majority of our educators and staff are white, we expect them to broaden their cultural lens and to create spaces where all children, where they build relationships with children and understand that they have to learn enough about that child and where they're coming from so that the child feels safe. Now, we're in different places in that. I'm not going to say tonight that every educator has done, is far enough along in the journey that I can, that they still have work to do. We all still have work to do, and it's an expectation. So I hope that there is a place for every child to have someone that they trust. And if you have a child in your home who doesn't feel that way, then I would implore you to please reach out to your principal or assistant principal or school guidance counselor and let us know.
And just one last note, Renee, we are working on actually increasing the amount of diversity in our staff. We have participated and hosted diversity fairs. We have not made the progress that we had hoped to make. The school committee fortunately funded a director of equity and diversity, a position that we'll have in place next year. We're hoping that position can help lead and drive many aspects of the work in Belmont, one of which would be hiring and retaining a more diverse staff. So that's part of our mission moving forward, and we hope to be able to make better, provide better results along with the PD for all staff, but increasing the diversity of our staff in Belmont.
Thank you, John. Before we pass this back over to Shayna, Renee, in direct response to your question about support for students, also there are a number of affinity groups in town that are working closely with the schools. You always have the Belmont Human Rights Commission to fall back on, that's open to every member of the community if they feel like they've been discriminated against in any form. We have the Pan-Asian Coalition, which just recently formed. If your child is having issues and nobody to talk to, they fall into the Pan-Asian category. They are there as a form of support. Black and Brown in Belmont also is a new affinity group that Renee is a part of. And they are also there to assist families, not only families with children, but any Belmont resident, again, that affiliates as Black and Brown or has a Black or Brown child. So, we're trying to work closely with the schools in order to provide that support that kids may feel, families feel like they don't have due to their culture. They can get that within the community. And I can actually put some email addresses in the chat at the end. I do want to remind everyone, we are at 15 minutes. So Shane is going to have one more question, and then I'll take the rest before we close out. Thank you.
So we did have a few questions that were written in to the COS email, as well as some sent in anonymously. So I'm going to read them. One concern for many parents is the difference in response to a Black student who made a video after school hours versus a student who spit on someone. And not just about the difference in discipline, but also the question of how things were communicated to the community.
So thank you, Shana. So that concern was brought to our attention by email just the other day. In the incident with the student who was spit on, because we did not have the student who did identified as the person who did the spitting, we did work with the family. We did work with the student. The guidance counselor actually stayed in that student's schedule and watched that stairwell with that student over a period of time to see if we could actually identify the student. And we did send out a communication. It was a little different because we didn't have explicit intent, but we actually had explicit results of that behavior, which were awful. In the issue with the video that was showed, there was an area of threat of violence towards a larger population of people, that people felt like that should have been handled differently. And I want to let you know that we learned a lesson in that middle school incident, where we actually tried to do it a little differently at the high school, where if there's a threat to the general population, we obviously work with the police department, as Jamie described earlier, with a threat assessment. At the middle school level, we did not take that child out of school during that time of assessing the threat, but this time at the high school, we did. That is the protocol, to remove that student while the investigation and the threat assessment is being done. And I think this goes back to what Ms. Buckley said, where we're really working at trying to be explicit with facts when issues occur. And if we weren't clear with the facts, then we may have to send something out to clarify. And we are getting to this point where we're communicating as best we can. And we're trying not to be in any way favoring one group versus another, or not communicating as well on one group or another. These are a rapid set of incidents that we're trying to balance our approach, be factual, be transparent, and also protect the students who are the victims and the families of those students. And some of the families don't want to be involved in having this become an identifiable situation that involves their family as a victim. So for that particular case, we thought we communicated pretty well. We did send out a second communication about the video issue, because we felt that there should be more facts that we felt the community should know about. So we did that. And if I believe there are a few parents that had a question about that, and I believe we sent an email back to say that we'll be meeting with them next week.
Got it. Here's another question that was written in, and Sarah posted it on the chat. It says, tonight we are talking about restorative justice to address specific incidents, but I'd like to hear more about how the school plans to begin to implement transformative justice systems. Going back to Renee's question, implementing transformative justice systems might help our school community work through the limits of restorative justice.
So we are not as, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I would add, just like hearing your comments regarding the different responses to different incidents, it seems that looking at these incidents through a transformative justice lens, which takes into account intersectionality and the identities of specific students with regard to their roles in the incidents, I think it would probably be helpful to the administration to sort of take into consideration more of a transformative justice lens as well, because I think it would make some of the challenges that you just referred to, they may fall into place differently. And I think it really does connect back to building the school culture that Renee was referring to, where all students feel they can find a supportive person, even within a situation where they're being asked to like redirect or change their behavior. In any event, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I do think that that's something that I sort of want to put on the radar as the transformative justice. And I'm so glad that we got that question. Thank you.
So we will look into transformative justice, Sarah, and if that's something that's an extension of our work, we will review that and see how we can build that into our repertoire.
Jess Helsman.
Hi. So my concern actually has to do with parents reacting and discussing hate incidents, and the fact that the way it's being discussed is oftentimes escalating, I was recently made aware of the fact that when some parents were discussing two different hate incidents, they had become more, I don't know how to say that. There's a mob component that can come into the fact when people are angry about a race incident and calling for certain consequences or disciplines to happen. And I think that white people don't realize that there's actually like a physical safety component of all of this anger that is happening. And I feel like that needs to be addressed to make sure that people are aware that these impassioned conversations that are happening online between parents can have some real safety consequences for students. So I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of that, and if you had any thoughts on kind of how to stop that. It sounds like you've done a lot of great stuff with the lectures and so forth, but if you had any further thoughts, I think that's a pretty big safety thing. Thanks.
You're welcome. Two quick responses. One is that we try to be measured and balanced in our approach to all of these, not by the amount of calls or the amount of emails or traffic on social media, but actually what happened and what the facts are. And always bringing it back to we're working with children and students, and we're trying to move them through this part of their life in a way that they end up being better people by the end of their time with us. As it goes for my hope and dream of how we could get people off online, if I could dismantle Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and all those things, all of which I don't partake in at all. I think I just have 3 stations on my TV, and I like a book and a newspaper, so I'm not on that platform. I wish it would come down. I don't see it as a healthy environment. As a person that works with children for 33 years, I think since we have had those elements of social media available, I have worked with students in the cafeteria who have said things and had to meet with them and have, consequences of restorative justice or conflict mediation. And then you would see the same thing happening with the adults online. And there seems to be no consequence. So I get it when it's a 12-year-old and a 13-year-old. I don't always understand it when it's a 53-year-old. So I worry about the online work, the online platforms that we see happening across a number of issues. And it does concern me. And every call we get, we try to call back, and every email we get, we try to work with everybody that we can. And as many community events that we can partner with folks on this call tonight, like we have in the past, we'll continue to do.
Thank you. So I'm going to pass the modding to Kim. Before I do, I'm calling on Joel Norton.
Thank you. I think this was touched on a bit, but I guess one of the things I'm wondering is about what's the role of our whole community in some of these incidents, and I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to see if there are ideas from other communities where when we have these kinds of community conversations, which I am so grateful to COS for doing, and the Human Rights Coalition. We have a lot of great groups in Belmont doing things like convenings like this, but it's often the same people coming to these events. And so I just wonder if there are ideas that would sort of help get a broader, if you've seen places where people are able to get a broader sort of swath of the community to come together for different kinds of events. I'm open to any of ideas like that.
Jill, in the schools, we're open to those ideas as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we had some great superintendent and assistant superintendent professional development today. We're going back for more work in July. The theme was equity, anti-racist teaching and work in schools. And from communities as far as Western Mass to more urbanized districts, everybody is working through these issues in different levels. And there's some great modeling. And one of the larger components that was discussed today was actually student voice, as brought up earlier. But there are book groups, there are guest speakers, there are different ways that people have brought communities together. And whatever Janice and I learn, we'll bring back to the folks in the community groups that we work with here in Belmont. And obviously, I think the community groups that we have here in Belmont have great ideas too. So how we can balance that all out and create a community conversation to address school issues, home issues, community issues is the end game, I think, for everybody on the call for sure.
And I would agree, Jill, that, you know, when we did have the different speakers come to Belmont, it was often the same people who came, who attended those as well. So I also would love to hear ideas for, you know, getting, and you know, to the point that Jess Hausman just made, you know, people who maybe are having some conversations online that are not contributing to a welcoming town community, that you know, children are going to make mistakes. That's what children do, and that's what part of what we do in the schools is help them learn from them. And we need to partner with adults who are also of that same mind. And so the more we can come together as a community, the better it will be for our children, who, you know, hopefully will take good care of us as we age.
Janice, so unfortunately, we are wrapping up. We are nearing the end of our discussion. So first, I would like to thank our esteemed panelists, Janice, Darias, John Phelan, Chief MacIsaac, DA Ryan, to all the parents, family members, community leaders who joined us. Thank you so much. If you did not get we did not get to your question, please send your question to causnewengland@gmail.com, and we will be sure that it gets to the appropriate person for your response. In addition, if you or your child or someone that you are aware of in the community has experienced, thank you, Shayna. Shayna has put the email to COS in the chat. But if anyone in your family, your child, yourself, a parent, a friend has experienced any sort of discrimination and you feel comfortable disclosing that information, please contact the Belmont Human Rights Commission. I have put the address in the chat. And I ask that you do that specifically because everything that goes through the BHRC is confidential. It stays within the group. So, and if you want to have a mediation, that can happen. And we also do work with the schools. We have liaisons that come through every month and give us an update on what's going on within the schools. And so we do have one last question I can answer before we step off. So where can people view the recording of this meeting? Sarah, can you say, thank you, Grace. The video will be posted on the COS YouTube channel in the next 24 hours.
And also later it will be on, I'm not sure at what time, but on Belmont Media Center on demand video. I'll write that in here.
Thank you, Meredith.
Okay.
Okay, if there are any closing words, Sarah from our COS leadership, would you like to close us out?
Sure. Thank you so much. This was such an engaging conversation, and based on, the amount of questions that we have in the chat, I think that this is just the beginning. And I'm so grateful to be in community with all of you. Everyone who's here this evening, I feel equally appreciative of every single one of you. And I'm so glad that we're all here together doing this work. Thank you so much. To be continued. I'm quite certain. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Be well.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.